So hello and welcome to another edition of Reconstructed, which is a podcast on understanding entrepreneurship and also looking at the future of work in the digital age. And today I'm delighted to be joined by the CEO of TalentDesk, Xenios Thrasyvoulou. How are you doing, Xenios?
Doing great, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Good to have you on. Now, at the moment, we're hearing a lot in the world of work about compliance topics, and particularly issues that companies and organizations are featuring. So it would be great to sort of hear a little bit about, from your side, about some of the main compliance issues that are being faced today within the talent, but also the HR sectors as well.
Well, fundamentally, the problem, if you think about it, is that the world of working has completely changed, especially post-COVID. People went to remote work, etc. And so the system, tax system in particular, and the legal system, which is there to protect largely the tax system when it comes to these issues for the government, has not evolved. So, and it needs to, because the boundary of what constitutes traditional employment as we used to know it and what it is today versus dependent contracting or freelancing, or you working under your own legal entity, that all of that boundary is blurring, and it's just increasingly more difficult to ascertain what bucket you fall into. But again, standing a little bit further back from that, I would question, why is it even important to ascertain that? Like, why try and solve a problem when you can just prevent it? And originally, the question was relevant only in as far as the tax collection. I think we've addressed this in a previous podcast, but
Yes.
Really, it's just easier for the government, if you take the UK in particular as an example, to levy its NIC contributions by slapping it at 13.8% across the board on employers' payroll. And it's just easier to monitor, it's easier to collect when you've got everyone working independently in their own companies, putting expenses in those companies, paying themselves dividend, etc. Maybe not even having an income, but just dividends. The whole collection becomes harder. And that's really the crux of the problem. In a world where employment was the vast majority of the way people worked, and consultancy or freelancing was an edge case, that wasn't that important. But in a world where it's got flatter and people choose now to be independent and travel the world and work remotely and work from their own home, just be in control of their own time and labor, etc., it's a kind of bigger problem. And we're fighting the problem as opposed to trying to prevent it. I think that's the wrong approach.
And how's it working from sort of the legal teams and HR departments within companies and organizations? Are they understanding this, or are they sort of, from the starting point, Xenios, they're very sort of risk averse and therefore maybe don't want to get down in the weeds of the issues and look into it? It's easy just to say a flat no, as opposed to sort of getting under the skin of these things.
No one understands it. Not even employment lawyers who are basically specialists in this. Honestly, pick up the phone, talk to 10 employment lawyers and tell them, I've got the situation. Is this person an employee, a contractor, consultant, etc.? They will only give you vague advice, because the authorities themselves are offering advisory-based sort of guidance. It's guidance-based. It's not something that can be black and white. So if you go to the HMRC website, or the equivalent of in the US, the IRS, and I'm sure in lots of other jurisdictions, it's pretty much the same thing. It's based on a set of guidelines. Does it feel like employment? Does it feel like contracting? If we're talking about, don't forget, by the way, compliance is not just about whether you're a contractor or an employee. There's all sorts of other compliance issues. Every industry has different regulatory bodies, and there's compliance specific to those industries, and all that's fine. You need sort of, in some industries you need to have specific insurance and so on and so forth. If you've got a builder coming over to your house, you need to have certain things in place. That's all good, and I think systems need to be in place to make sure that you're compliant to deliver the job that you're hired to do or you're practicing, and ethically and correctly, and so on. But when it comes to this whole question of like, what are you? To your point, if you understand it, nobody does, because it's all guidance based. And so there's all this muddle and this gray area that everyone's trying to navigate, and it's becoming increasingly fearful of, because it's just it's not really defined.
Yeah.
And even
Yeah.
if you follow the guidelines and you're like, okay, based on these guidelines, and you take a view that actually this person is genuinely a freelancer or employee or whatever, you're still not 100% guaranteed. So if something does happen, there's some sort of claim for whatever reason, then you really aren't 100% protected. So
Mm.
I think all of that needs to change.
So is this a situation whereby government policy or legislation regulation needs to be tightened up to actually sort of fall down on one side or the other, to have much better definitions of what is an employer, what is an employee, what is a contractor, what is a consultant, so that we can have more firm definitions of which bucket of activity individuals fall into?
But that's why I said it's harder to solve an ill-defined problem
Yeah.
when the markets change than to go back to its roots and try to eliminate the problem. Prevention is always better than cure. So let me ask you this: why does distinction matter? Like
Mm.
fundamentally, like imagine there wasn't a distinction in jurisdiction today,
Yeah.
or you're creating an economy from scratch today. Like, why does it matter?
Yes, it really doesn't, and I think this is a great issue, that the means and the ends can be the same thing, and people should have the flexibility to choose when, where, and how they earn money. Sometimes it can be from an employment situation. Sometimes it can be contracting on different projects, and we seem to be sort of creating these artificial boxes just to keep our legacy issues happy, as opposed to looking at the world as it is now and treating it as such.
So in jurisdictions, there's not that many in the world, but they do exist, where there's no income tax. Does this
Mm.
matter? Absolutely not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because,
Mm.
and this is what we addressed the last time, right? Ultimately, what it comes down to is tax collection. But tax collection hasn't reformed since in this domain for a very long time. The world has moved on. But if you look at every year when the chancellor announces the budget and different sort of tax changes, etc., right?
Yeah.
In a way, a lot of it is to do with whatever the property market's evolved and the way they kind of collect stamp duty or whatever it is changed in line with that. The problem is that in employment, it's the employment landscape and the nature of employment has changed dramatically, especially in the last couple of years, and there's not been any change whatsoever in tax. So, and that's the problem. So you're trying to address a tax collection problem through distinctions of types of employment, when that distinction is blurred and becoming more and more blurred, right? And it's only relevant really to tax collection. Okay, so in a world where, let's just say theoretically, if you redesign the system and everyone, no matter what you are, employee, etc., paid a flat or some kind of contribution to national insurance, etc., regardless, if it wasn't the employer's responsibility to pay that on the behalf of company of employees, etc., which then creates this problem intrinsically, problem solved, right? So then who's bothered? Who is bothered? If you pay yourself a dividend of X, let's say you make 100K a year, whether it's for employment or not, if the contribution to the state is the same, whether it's, I believe in NIC, I think it's a great thing to have. I believe in healthcare being free, etc.
Right.
Unlike other countries which haven't got it right, and we know who we're talking about. I totally believe in that. But if you're collecting it in a way which is becoming broken as a channel because of the distinction, then you just need to change the way you do that, right? And if you did, then guess what? No one cares if you're independent contractor or employee, other than then you get to the real stuff that matters. You get to the stuff such as, maybe the company cares because they want to retain you for longer, give you stock options, give you equity, etc.
Right.
Or maybe they care because of intellectual property, which you can solve anyway with contracts, etc. So then you get to the real, nitty-gritty of it, where or the employee in that instance, for example, wants the security of maternity leave, etc., which are all things that I believe in. But that's who should actually care, is the person who's being employed and the employer deciding on, hey, you're a long-term investment for us, and we don't want you to work for anybody else, etc. We want you to be an employee. And that's the decision that it should be around the fundamentals of the work itself and the employment itself, not around oh, this person is cheating the kind of a contract. They're not really a contract. And it comes down to tax collection. That should change. It will change eventually. It's just going to take some time. I think it's just going to be a case of the government realizing that this is a bigger problem than it is. Because, like I said, as we see from the changes in the tax regime annually, they address the bigger pots. They're like, oh, this needs to change. Eventually, they're going to wake up and realize that this whole distinction is ridiculous, and we need to kind of change how we collect NIC and income tax to cater for this convergence of employment status.
Yeah, I think so, Xenios, because we're coming to can we call it a tipping point? But even just sort of pre-COVID, this was sort of kind of a kind of niche thing, the open talent model. But now we're seeing so many more people coming into this. Even in the European Union context, we're talking between 40 and 50 million people who are freelancers or independent contractors. UK is also sort of increasing rapidly. So once we reach that tipping point, there'll probably be more of a impetus to look at the classification issue, because at the moment it's really revenue collection. Everyone's worried about making sure that they still guarantee the money that they've got for hospitals and schools and the rest of it. But the fundamental change needs to happen in terms of what is an employer, and actually getting rid of a lot of these artificial bans and artificial criteria, which are leading to this classification and misclassification in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I agree.
So we need to sort of look at this. And, do you think there's enough discussion or thoughts going on at the level of decision makers and opinion formers in terms of how this system can work, that to really look at the sort of the future of work in a more joined up way, and to think about sort of this better tax collection models and better classification of individuals, and getting rid of these artificial barriers?
I don't think so, but listen, I'm very detached from politics because of that reason. It's politics, right? It's people like having different agendas, and like trying to change anything is a nightmare. But is there enough thought being put into this? I don't think so. In the meantime, there's a lot of fear of this because the world has moved on, and then there's a lot of vultures out there who are capitalizing on it, unfortunately, by promising companies services that they can't actually deliver by the letter of the law, because of some fake assurances that, oh, we've got you covered, etc. around, oh, if you're going to be misclassified, if you've done it wrong, then it's on us. So it's one of those rogue kind of, it happens in so many markets, right? We've seen the financial markets, we've seen it everywhere. Right? Whenever there's some kind of asymmetry between regulation or definition of the law and what people are not allowed to do, although they know that it's unethical. The banking crisis 2008 is a very clear example of things that people acting, quite frankly, quite unethically, on the borderline of what's permitted and what's not, but regulation wasn't tight enough, it then tightened up, etc. And then like a big bang happens, and it's like, question is, it's big enough for anyone to really care as much? But it's one of those areas where whenever there's a bit of that asymmetry, a couple of things happen. People become fearful, and other people become greedy. That amplifies the asymmetry, and the people who become very greedy start offering things or selling things that they can't actually back up. It's happened in the financial markets. It's happening in this industry, and it will take one big blow up for people to start paying attention. It's happened back then. It will happen again. It's just, the only thing history has ever taught us is that it keeps repeating. It's the same thing, right? And in different industries, it's there's talks of that now in insurance because of whatever, the way private equity deals done in the insurance market, etc. So people are just going to, by nature, try and find gaps and capitalize from sort of these asymmetries to make money, and eventually, it then becomes a problem, and then it's fixed. Well, it's not never fixed. It's addressed.
Because at the moment we're really got it seems to be an increase in scaremongering by organizations who are saying to repeat your point about the fact that there are individuals that look, you can hire people anywhere, we'll take care of all the liabilities, all the compliance issues, pay us this rather large sum and we'll take care of it, and it's all fine. So there's people sort of profiting from the current grey areas and the lack of sort of clarity on a lot of these labour market issues at the moment, Xenios.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's happening.
Yeah.
And there are some. I'm not suggesting that everyone. There are some good, like in every market. There's some good players. There's some really corrupt players. There's some very unethical and who don't care. They just want to make a quick buck. And there is a lot of scaremongering out there in sort of this freelance contract management space and sort of employer of record space, etc. All of this big area of like, okay, how alternative ways of employment, PEOs, etc. It's just. And then added to that complexity is that it differs jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So US is very different. In the US, it's even different state by state. In the UK, at least, we don't have that problem. But so it is a growing spaghetti maze of logic that it's just messy, 100%.
It is, but also with all things that are new and developing, there could be a lot of negativity as well. If, as you said, if one of these rogue actors were to cause problems in the sector, then that brings down the house for everyone, whether it's the good actors, the less reputable ones. Everyone gets caught within the crosshairs, and then we have sort of government policy or the authorities will come in and look at this and take the action, but also it's the negativity that this can spread around the whole sector itself, and cause a lot of negativity for the future of work, the development of the labour market, and a lot of the platforms who are doing great things in good faith will also be swept away by this, unfortunately.
Well, we don't really know. But again, if you look at, for example, how these changes in the R35 in the UK happen, so that is a good example, right? The government flipped the responsibility from the one party, the contractor, to the company without. So my question is, that's proving the point that it's all about like, okay, that's going to make it easier for us to collect taxes because now companies will be more afraid because they will foot the bill. It's more punitive to them. So it's just flipping the responsibility, but it's not trying to avoid the problem. It's trying to drive behavior based on who foots the bill, where the punitive, who's more responsible and who pays the biggest penalty, and it's just the wrong way of addressing it, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely, but it does push people more towards traditional employment contracts in terms of the traditional perspective of what is an employer, what is an employee, and the roles and responsibilities that are very old-fashioned are still being stretched to look at this sector, Xenios, it seems.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't know what your question is. It was like, I think I've alluded a few times. I think the whole system needs to be kind of redesigned. And I mean, ultimately, it's from the bottom up. In my opinion, it should come down to the person. Like much like you are, like traditionally, a company decides to employ you. It's not exactly like the US, which is employment at will, but the offer comes from the company employs you, you decide to work for the company, etc. I think if the system was to be rethought from the ground up, if you want to be independent, and there is this registration that you can do, which is you file for independent, you are an independent contractor, and you declare a bunch of things which should not be guideline based, but actually in black and white. And
Yeah.
then you pay the same amount of taxes that you would otherwise, right? It's just a different way of paying it, and NIC and all the rest of it. Yeah. Then there's no question to be battled with, because at the end of the day, the person who owns their labor, their time, who decide they want to be independent and maybe miss out on some of the luxuries of being employed, but you want to do that. As long as then you
Yes.
can actually sort out how do you pay your taxes, and therefore close that gap of like the government being like, oh, are all these ICs paying the same amount or not? Are we collecting the same amount? But deal with that separately. Then you also solve the scaremongering problem, because if you come to me and you're a registered self-employed, declared, and tick the boxes saying I confirm that da 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 da, and you are, there's no risk to me. You come to me and say, that you are, it's a bit like saying go to the doctor. The doctor has some responsibility to perform a duty based on, and I don't want to check that. I just take comfort that they are that person. And it's, why should it be different from, why is the company all of a sudden having to take a view as to whether that person genuinely is or not? If they actually, if there's a process for the worker to be not just guideline based, but beyond any doubt declared as a independent person, and end of story. Then I hire you, and I know that I can't treat you as an employee, because anyway you wouldn't have that because you're independent. I can't ask you to come to my premises where I can't do X, Y, and Z, and that's fine. But it removes all of this fear. So currently, like I said before, like especially in the UK with this whole IR35 pillar, like it's just flipping the responsibility to the employer, and then you've got that headache. But then you're not really that much in control of the person either. You have some control, but so all of it is just a broken system.
Yeah, no, it seems to be. I mean, is there actually some mileage in actually having sort of an opt-in procedure here that, when you're explaining as sort of an independent contractor, you actually sort of can decide yourself and opt in and say, look, this is what I am. So you decide. So we take away this kind of like mandatory and sometimes quite sort of shadowy behavior, that it's the authorities and decision makers who are deciding, are you an employee, are you a contractor, what's your status, that you actually can actually sort of go down this route yourself and decide, tick a box, and therefore you go into a certain area that all these things are decided for you. Because a lot of people as well are wanting to be independent contractors, freelancers, whatever you like to call it, but given the way the policy is, they're being dragged down in almost an employment channel that they have no desire to be following. Xenios, could this be a way forward almost?
Yeah, but it's exactly what I said in a way, right? It's just this kind of like, whether it's a registration or some kind of opt-in, like you as the person who decides to be a contractor. Because at the end of the day, if you want to be an employee, I can't make you a contractor, right? So the employer should, I can't, and if I am, then I should be penalized, because but then you arguably wouldn't take the job because you want to be an employee. So I think it comes down to that free will. If you want to be a contractor, and there was a more ironclad way of being one, because it's not very clear cut now. You can operate out of a company, you can operate as a self-employed person, as an individual. Again, every jurisdiction is different. In some countries, like in Greece, you have a little block that you kind of pay. It's just manual. So it's all a bit and then you've got that cross-border problem as well. But in the jurisdiction where you pay taxes, because all of it comes down to taxes in the end, where it matters, right? That's why this whole gray area exists. If it's more black and white, the way you opt in or register, etc., and you offer your services to a company who knows that person kind of ticked those boxes and it's not down to them, then it solves largely that problem. And then it really is a question of tax collection. Like, how does the government then regulate and make sure that, because if everyone's a contractor and no one pays NIC, then we've got another problem, right? But that, as I said, that is a tax collection issue, not a what are you issue. So we're trying to solve a different problem, address a pain through auxiliary means of looking at, do you have other customers? Are you exclusive and all that stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you level the playing field on taxes, no one cares about that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not trying to find a loophole to get around it and avoid paying tax. It's just basically having the freedom and flexibility and the choice that you want as an individual. That's the sort of the main thing. I mean, I think there's, some people, of course, no one wants to pay too much tax, but at the end of the day, I think sort of the average person knows that they have to pay tax. They respect that, and they're within that mindset. They can't be trying to sort of cut corners, because that'll come back to bite them anyway. So I think it needs to be done in the right way on these things.
Oh, good luck to us. We're dealing with governments, but
Well,
in any event.
But I think at the end of the day, Xenios, this is going to be talent led. I think as more and more people go down this route, we're going to be in a position whereby the authorities will have to change as well, because they'll have to sort of wake up to the reality of what's happening. And I think there will also be a push from sort of companies, platforms to say that, hang on, this is a legitimate choice that we're making. And we need to be able to find some kind of solution that we can, of course, continue paying the tax, but not have this kind of 1940s, 1950s solution whereby we throw everything back onto the employer and they have to sort it out. We don't really care about how this works.
Well, I think, yeah, I think it's totally imaginable that in the next X number of years, the total percentage of the workforce that's on full-time traditional employment will shrink.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of the way, I think and there's probably things that we can't imagine today, but even sort of young graduates from university today, they want to travel the world, work from wherever they can, often earn more money than they would on a starting salary job, be free, whilst doing, selling the services online. There's loads of them, like, they're teaching stuff that they can be doing language and doing a couple of hours a day where they, it's not necessarily this classic, oh, I'm going to join a big FTSE 100 company, join a career. And they actually make good money and they live their life. And so traditional employment, as we know it, as a portion of the total, will only shrink. And I think then it's going to be evident to jurisdictions that they have a problem. Because if you say, let's take it to the extreme, if half, if the population of workers who are actually in traditional employment halves, then there's a big question, there's a big issue when it comes to things like national insurance contribution, which is slapped at 13.8% in the UK. Then the government has a reduction in its income, and then that becomes something to look into, and then it will drive reform. But now it's still, but it will happen, right? Because think about it, like the employment as a percentage of the total will only drop.
Yeah.
It's just going to happen. It's happening already. It's not going to, you're not going to go, but the way you measure employment is going to, it's just, people will not be on PAYE or W-2 in the US, a standard as it is today. It's just a given. But then it will have to be flagged and raised.
Yeah, things will have to change. Well, it can't come soon enough, because we have too many sort of grey areas, loopholes, and this misclassification of people, and kind of looking for problems where they don't really need to exist. That's the issue. But really appreciate you sort of talking about these compliance and classifications issues, Xenios, from the inside, and shining a light on what's actually happening. And let's hope we can sort of revisit this in not too distant future and see that the ball is already rolling in terms of having a better system of looking at these topics as well.
I wouldn't keep my hopes up too much, although I am an eternal optimist. But I'm optimistic when it comes to most things, apart from when you're dealing with old bureaucracies,
right,
and red tape, because I just historically have not seen that sort of lead to any efficient change unless they're brought to their knees and have to.
Right.
And that's one area where I'm not very optimistic on. I think generally companies will carry on doing the right things, I think, and minus some of the stuff that we mentioned, there is scaremongering, there are vultures out there. I think the message should be for a lot of companies to be aware of that. But yeah.
Well, we live in hope and we have our fingers crossed, and we keep fighting the good fight as well, Xenios, in the right direction on these things. And fantastic to be able to sort of share your time, be able to hear your thoughts on these topics, and look forward to hearing you again soon.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for having me. Have a good day.